And I think we have to be careful not to miss the provision of God for companionship in our lives. And not just the provision, but the necessity. You think back in the Gospel of John, chapter 15, we see why this is a necessity. Because it's something that Christ commands his people. He commands friendship. In verse 12 of John 15, he says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I've called you friends, for all that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask in the Father's name, he may give it to you. These things I command you, so that you will love one another." We see here that Christ commands friendship. It's not just a convenience, but a necessity for our life of faith. So how are we to understand this friendship? Because we all know that we want friends. Or do we? We live in a current societal moment where friendship is kind of tricky. See, we can understand the nature of the friendship that Christ intends for us, and it is very different than the way that the world sees and interacts as friends. See, you have in this passage, John 15, he commands us to love one another as he has loved us. So therefore, that sets the gold standard for friendship. That's the ideal. That's the foundation. What's the foundation? Love. But not just an affectionate, warm, fuzzy feeling that you have for people. And so you can't dismiss that, well, I don't feel that way for them, therefore I don't have to be their friend. What's the kind of love he's talking about? The kind of love that someone lays down his life for his friends. So now it's not self-serving, but actually self-sacrificial. It's a different kind of friendship than the world has. See, in the world's eyes, it's very transactional. Friendship is a transaction. It's very self-feeding. We might have friendships in the world that are based on maybe mutual or self-interest, maybe similar interests or affinities, recreation, things that we like to do. Maybe there's some sort of commonality that brings us together. Maybe it's a mutual benefit, that I have a friendship where I'm friends with you, I do things for you, it benefits me, and so we kind of have this agreement. Maybe we don't say it, but we certainly operate transactionally. Or maybe it's for social status. Maybe our friendships are designed to help increase our social capital. So if you hang out with the cool kids, what does that mean about you? You're a cool kid. You're in the in crowd, popular. And so sometimes we have these kind of ways of choosing our friends for personal benefit. Which also means, in the world's eyes, if that friendship is no longer beneficial, do you have to keep it? No, you can discard it. If a friendship's not helping you, well, then you don't have to keep it. Biblically, we're called to a sacrificial kind of friendship, which also means that it's not temporary or based on what we receive, but in fact, it has nothing to do with what we might get in return. Biblical friendship talks about sacrifice, and it also talks about commitment, that we remain, that we stick it out. When Paul writes his letters to the Ephesians and the Colossians, he talks about this kind of friendship. He says, bear with one another in love, in complete humility, forgiving each other. Whoa. So that means there's an expectation that when we are friends in a biblical context, we are going to hurt each other. We're going to fail each other. We're going to mess up. We're going to hurt feelings. We're going to be offended. And what he says is you bear with one another, that you stay in it. You don't exit. You don't cancel it. But you bear with one another in humility. And you forgive, and you endure. And that's a different way than that the world sees friendship. And yet that's supposed to define the way that we interact together. Biblical friendship, self-sacrificial. And so this passage in John 15, I think, forces us to ask some questions. Friendship then is not just accidental, but it's intentional. If this is the kind of friendship that we're to engage in, and it's not a natural way in which the world engages in friendship, that means we have to choose to be this kind of friend. We have to initiate it. So oftentimes we want friendship, but we want it to happen to us. I want someone to come along and be a good friend to me so that I have a good friend. And still, that's seeing friendship in the way that the world does, that it serves me. But the Bible calls us to an intentional kind of friendship. Therefore, I'm going to initiate and engage in friendships that may have no personal benefit to me, but God has put them in my path, and so I'm going to engage with them. And I will initiate in a sacrificial kind of friendship. And I don't know what it's going to cost me. It may cost me everything. But that's the standard that the scriptures teach us. That's the demonstration of Christ. And remember, he doesn't necessitate something he doesn't also provide for. And so if God is calling you to that kind of friendship, he's going to provide you the resources that you need, the assurance, the protection as you engage in that kind of friendship. But it means that friendship can be inconvenient. Maybe it's not on your schedule. Maybe you had other stuff planned for your day, and then you get a call. And you realize that you have to put aside everything you had planned for the rest of the day because someone needs you. And so you go and you're there for them. Maybe it's sitting in a hospital. Maybe it's going and tending to some chores with them. Maybe it's just sitting with them as they cry because they just got a diagnosis and they don't know how to handle that. But it is going to be inconvenient, I promise you. But that's the kind of friendship that God's called us to. Some people may say, well, I don't really need a friend. Well, I just read a Wall Street Journal article this past week. And it was interesting because now the studies have shown, multiple studies show that we actually need at least 2 to 3 friends in order to fully thrive psychologically and emotionally. So while you may say, no, I'm good without, typically we can maintain about 2 to 3 really close friendships. It was also interesting that this study showed that it takes to move from an acquaintance to a friend. Psychologists identify that it takes roughly 40 to 60 hours of time spent. So it's like 50 hours. So you think about if you're going to move from acquaintance to friend with somebody, a coffee a week for about an hour, you'll just become friends after the first year. Then they said to move from good friend to really that kind of close friend that you need takes about 200 hours of time spent together. That's like 4 years of coffee. And also the quality, the time, the way that you spend time is going to matter. But the indication is that we do need friends. And if you think that maybe you're good without, and you're happy to be a hermit all by yourself, that doesn't address the reality that while you may not need friendship, you need to be a good friend if you're going to follow Christ. Because he commands it. Amen. He commands, be a good friend. Love one another. As I've loved you, you will love. Right? And his example was, it wasn't like we loved him first. What's the reality? Because of the love with which he's loved us, we can now love each other. He's initiated this friendship. He's engaged with us first. And he's called us to this. And the scriptures also warn in James chapter 4 that if you are a friend of the world, then you're an enemy of God. The reality is it's a friendship with the Lord and it's a friendship with each other. That's what the gospel of Jesus Christ redeems us for. That's what his sacrifice accomplishes for us. Not only the necessity of this kind of relationship with each other, but also the provision for it. That while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Because it's Genesis chapter 3 that blows the whole thing up. What happens in Genesis 3? It's the fall, the Garden of Eden. And what happens? It creates animosity between humanity and God and within humanity. And when Christ comes and he lives the perfect life and he climbs up on that cross and he sacrifices himself, he conquers sin and death, the very things that keep us from our relationship with the Lord and each other. And he overcomes those things and then provides us a way past that into the kind of life we were designed for. A life of love and flourishing. And we can't have that without friendship. And so let us recognize what the Lord's doing here. Let us recognize what he's clearly provided for Paul and his divine necessity and provision for all that he's called Paul to involves divine friendship. Gospel redeemed friends that are sticking it out with each other. And so maybe we ask ourselves, am I being a friend? Am I sacrificing for other people? Am I willing to pursue a biblical friendship that points me towards Christ and not towards self or the world? The Proverbs tell us the kind of friendship that sharpens each other. Iron sharpening iron.